light within our hearts, light within our thoughts, light within our words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. With me today on the show is my friend David Slater, a spiritual counselor and intuitive. And this is a fairly broad topic we picked for today. But it's one that applies to so many things. I'm not quite sure where our conversation's going to go.
Do we ever?
The constructive, creative, and I suppose yet cautious response to that which is unfamiliar. You know, when we meet something, someone, some situation, some challenge that is unlike anything we've ever had to deal with before. Mm-hmm. How to find sufficient security in ourselves, sufficient faith in ourselves, to be able to respond constructively rather than being shocked or disillusioned or thrown off balance or what have you by this encounter. I guess to start it out with this attention to faith in ourselves. I don't know that people think about it that much, but I think it's really much more important than most people give it credit for being. My favorite definition of faith, which seems like a reasonable place to start, is from the movie The Rescuers.
Okay.
It's an animated Disney movie. Penny is this little girl in an orphanage, and she's talking with this old cat who is the pet, the mascot, if you will, the house pet of the orphanage.
Rufus, I think.
Rufus,
yeah.
the old cat.
Uh-huh.
And he says, "We have to keep faith." And she says, "What's faith, Rufus?" And every time he says that, it's like, everybody be very quiet and listen. No talking during this scene. And Rufus says, "Faith is a bluebird you see from afar. It's as sure and as real as the first evening star. Can't touch it or buy it or wrap it up tight, but it's there just the same, making things turn out right."
Oh, nice.
And that's what Penny says again at the end of the movie. It's like Rufus said, faith makes things turn out right.
Uh-huh.
The challenge, of course, of this movie is from the moment Rufus told her that to the end of the movie, Penny is kidnapped, taken to a remote Louisiana bayou, put down a hole to look for some diamond that was buried by a pirate. Put in life-threatening situations,
yep.
in deplorable circumstances. She's sending out messages in bottles, hoping somebody will rescue her, because nobody knows where she is. Except, of course, the person who kidnapped her. This horrible, horrible, trying experience that goes on for days and days and months and weeks. Mm-hmm. And somehow she maintains faith that things will turn out right in spite of everything she sees.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks to the intervention of the oddest assortment of animals around, led by two little mice, everything turns out right.
Mm-hmm.
So when we meet something unfamiliar, to have enough faith in ourselves that we don't have to assume the worst.
Well, for folks our age, it's a little bit easier to speak to it because we're over 21. We got here.
The more things you've been through, the more things you're able to face.
You have more evidence of the fact that you can handle it.
But very often the only reason you do handle it is because you don't give up.
Yes. But giving up is...
But when you're in the middle of it, I have no idea if it's going to end well or not. And I don't know what I'm going to do next. I just know that I have to keep trying.
I've had the delight of filling out a resume. And in filling out a resume, I realized, wow, I've done a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And again, at 18, it's a pretty short resume. Mm-hmm. And, after this many years, it's like, what can't I do? What can't I handle? It's
accounting.
Accounting is one I'll avoid.
Conversation.
Exactly. I
can't do accounting either. So.
Yeah, and I choose to avoid that. Great. The fact that I'm going to be hired, or the thought that I'm going to be hired by Standard & Poor's, not real likely. So I get to avoid that bullet, so to speak. But encountering the new, the unusual, the never seen before is getting to be more frequent. If you think about it.
More frequent?
I think so.
What's making it more frequent?
The being able to see more possibilities. Movies, day-to-day experiences, what we see on a computer or whatever.
So is it that it was there before and we didn't notice it?
We didn't get a chance to experience it. For instance, H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. When it was a radio show, people were, getting guns. Totally freaked out. Do you think tomorrow, if Obama had a press conference with a little green man standing next to him, most people would say, I thought so. Now it fits into our parameters. Another example is in the early 20s when Igor Stravinsky debuted Rites of Spring. Okay. And in Paris, it was answered by a riot because no one had ever heard an orchestra make these kinds of sounds before. 6 months later, it was played in Munich to rave reviews. And if you and I listen to Rites of Spring, it's like, oh, that's a delightful piece of orchestral music.
Okay.
Again, it's what we adapt to from our experience.
Something very particular to the style that the French didn't like.
Yes. And, well, how many times...
Not enough of a music critic to know what it was that would have caused such a reaction, but...
What was your first response when you heard the music where someone's screaming into a microphone very angry words? You weren't real quick to pick up on that.
Well, I probably wouldn't have understood it, but...
yes.
But I understand that point anyway.
Yes. So we keep on getting new things, but the thing is our expression is getting so large. The possibilities, what we see can be possibilities, is making the diversity of what we experience greater. You and I...
But it always seems to me that if you meet something new, the first thing to do is engage in a dialogue. The caveat to that, of course, is that the new thing may not want to engage in a dialogue.
Right.
You may want to know all about it. Where did this come from? What does it mean to you? What's the inspiration? Can you tell me the history of it? And the new entity may not either know or may not want to go into all that.
Right.
Or they may say, you just need to listen to it. But you listen to it and you don't understand it because you don't have any context in which to frame it.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll say, well, you just have to listen to it. Well, I would say, no, I don't have to just listen to it. I have to know more about it. You need to give me the background information.
Right.
And they may or may not be willing to do that.
And if circumstances are happening fast enough, you may not have the time for it either.
Yeah.
There was, again, due to this wonderful thing of technology, saw this series of videos of a young man in a Superman suit with his regular clothes over the top of them.
Okay.
And there are no phone booths anymore. So what he was doing was going around to folks saying, hey, can you hold my glasses? And then, disrobe and, his Superman costumes. And then he would take off like he was headed for, crime fighting or whatever. Mm-hmm. And these people are holding bags or his glasses or whatever. They don't know what to do next. But no one freaked out, so to speak.
Okay.
One gentleman who looked like he maybe read a comic book or two in his life, set the glasses down, turned, and saluted. But that's the thing. We can accept so many things now. because our experience is getting greater and greater and greater, because we're experiencing things that even didn't happen to us. We get a visual, a written story, or whatever.
But that's also affected by context. There are a lot of things you would accept on a street in New York City
Right.
that you would not tolerate on the sidewalk between the street and your front door.
Right.
You know, the whole not in my backyard thing. You know, the
Yeah.
wacky craziness can happen out there.
Uh-huh.
Don't let it get too close to home.
The thought comes, what
I
if...
mean, not everybody, but
Right.
but that's a common struggle in society also.
The thought, again, of stepping out your front door and seeing an object fly over your home that doesn't fit the parameters of what we know to be aircraft. And then again, I'm not saying the ETs are out there like
dragon
that.
or something.
Yes, it would cause pause, without a doubt, but your reality wouldn't have to shut down.
Wouldn't have to. I suspect for most people, the response would be very much informed by what movies they've seen.
Right. Exactly.
If a dragon flew overhead and you stepped out the front door and saw it go flying overhead,
Mm-hmm.
if you had seen all the horrible movies of, you know, Dragon Slayer and so forth, of the dragons that were adversarial and dangerous and ate people and so forth, that would probably provoke a response of fear and terror and flight and hiding in your basement or I don't know what.
Mm-hmm.
If, on the other hand, the movie you had most recently seen was How to Train Your Dragon,
Right.
You know, one which actually suggests the development of friendship between humans and dragons,
Mm-hmm.
you know, in a very collaborative sort of way. You know, maybe you'd be there waving hello and smiling and, oh, come on down, I'll get you some food to eat or something.
Yeah.
And you know, at that point we would find out which of the two dragons you were actually dealing with.
Exactly.
You know, whether it came down and you know, bit off your hand and you said, well, that's a fine lot of gratitude.
Exactly.
I was going to give you lunch, you know, but it didn't mean for you to eat me.
Yeah. You gave him lunch.
You know, but on the flip side, it might be, was it The Day the Earth Stood Still? The old sci-fi movie about the spaceship that lands
And the robot gets it.
with a message of peace,
Uh-huh.
but the human response is violent, and once the peace emissary is wounded, the robot that is the alternative comes out as the destroyer
Right.
to respond to the violence in kind.
Mm-hmm.
But the first act of violence was not done by the extraterrestrial, but by the humans.
Right.
And so, in a sense, it's as if it gave us what we gave it. You know, we got what we gave.
What a saying that's been going through my life and my head a whole lot is the old saying, when you're a hammer, the world looks like a nail.
The world looks like a nail.
Yeah, and I'd mentioned this before. But the idea is, when we don't have a diverse experience or concept of the world, we only know one way to interact with it.
So the first invitation is to broaden our own self-definition
Yes.
to being a spectrum of tools.
Yes.
That as long as we look in the mirror and see only one thing, we haven't discovered the best parts of ourselves, and we will not be able to constructively meet the diversity of things that come at us.
Mm-hmm. I see this a lot of times in spirituality, and the very old classic. Everything is either from God or Satan, and if
the assumption that there's a polarity, and that's the only polarity that exists, and the only way that it can be interpreted, and so forth.
Yeah, and if I've never seen it before, experienced it before, it's got to be from Satan. And again,
Demonize everything unfamiliar.
Exactly. I don't choose that. I want to see, how can this be different? How can I approach something different? Because I see people doing the same things over and over again and wondering why, not expecting a different result, but getting the same result and not choosing it. They're being angry with the result or not liking the result and still repeating the same actions. If I've interacted with someone 3 times now, and
Though there have been times on my computer, I swear, where I've done the same thing 3 times and gotten 3 different responses.
results, isn't that fun?
So it's not as predictable as the computer designers think it is.
Well, I like it when I interact with someone, say 3 times in a row, and it's not a positive, what would appear to be a positive interaction. I like to think, okay, how can this be different? And
I usually tell people, when in doubt, phrase it as a question.
yes, exactly.
When in doubt, phrase it as a question. Instead of assuming that you know what this person is like,
Yes,
or what their intentions are, or what they want from you, to ask.
and you can preface the question rather easily. You can approach the person and say, last 3 times, it doesn't feel like I honored you well, or that this went smoothly. And what I really want is for this to go smoothly. How can we do this in a smoother, or at least different way? And that's what's...
Or if there's something specific, to even ask more directly and say, what does it mean when you do such and such?
Yes.
I think I know what it... I've made an interpretation, but I don't know if I'm right.
Yeah.
What does it mean when you walk up and wave your hand right in front of my face?
Exactly.
And one science fiction book I wrote, or I read, one science fiction book I read had a particular scene in which this space pilot was landing on a new planet, and he got out of the spaceship, and these kind of lizard-like creatures gathered around looking at him, but they were kind of humanoid, so he knew that they were, not just lizards, but a lizard people of sorts. And he had some kind of universal translator or whatever, and he smiled at them and waved, and they stared at him very puzzled, and finally asked, "Why are you baring your teeth at us?"
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Because to them, baring your teeth and smiling, we would interpret those two as very different.
Right.
One being threatening and the other being friendly. They were unable to make a distinction.
Right. This is something, again, a previous time we interacted, where I find autism to be a gift to others. And, okay, I don't experience autism directly in my life, but for instance, when you say, okay, I think I know what this means, but I really need you to clarify.
Mm-hmm.
When you and I interact and you say those things to me, I love this, because it's like, oh, I wasn't very clear, and I get to speak more clearly, and I have someone now I get to interact with that seeks clarity, because I am.
But there are some other people who would respond to that, instead of seeking more clarity.
Mm-hmm.
Say, I was too clear.
Exactly.
And it's like, evidently you weren't if I didn't understand. And no, I was perfectly clear. The problem is you're not intelligent enough or something. And we're back to that self-righteous kind of throwing up a wall, where there doesn't need to be one. But that's where I come back to saying, when in doubt, phrase it as a question. Don't assume that you are the smartest, wisest, most knowledgeable, wonderful person on earth and couldn't possibly be wrong about anything. Because as you've said, it's not about right or wrong. It's about whether or not the understanding transferred from one mind to another.
And the variables that are involved in that, it's incredible. I have decided...
So many variables.
Oh, yeah. I've decided that humans in our society get most of their exercise from jumping to conclusions. And sometimes that's the only exercise they get. But when I point at that, I realize I'm trained in this society, so I do the exact same thing. And
the more multicultural the world becomes, the more jumping to conclusions is going to be a very risky behavior.
Exactly. So when you want clarity from me, I'm like, oh, thank you. I love this, because I don't know how many times things will fall all apart when the whole concept of the misunderstanding was off of a single word or an inflection in the way the word was done.
And very often it's not even what's said, it's the underlying assumptions.
Yes, exactly.
I don't remember the name of the play that I saw 30 years ago, but it was this somebody wrote this reflective sort of thing about a house full of women, a mother and 3 daughters, and one of them is dying of tuberculosis, and it's somewhere set in the 1930s, I think. But the mother is this self-righteous, Bible-thumping, dogmatic, closed-minded nemesis, really. And I don't remember over the course of the play if she finally manages to start opening her mind to things or not, but there's one scene where she's going on voicing her bigotry about how she doesn't approve of foreigners. And one of her daughters very sarcastically says, "Well, Mother, the Bible is full of foreigners." And without missing a beat, she says, "Yes, but they all spoke English." Which, of course, is totally ridiculous, because, and it's pure translation. But the ways that people respond to what's different and force it into their preconceived notions and their assumptions about how reality has to be, instead of showing up with a question and simply asking, what is this reality like? And who is here? And not assuming that they know who is here.
On the assumptions, anytime I spot something that doesn't agree with me outside of me, the one assumption I do make is it's obviously inside of me.
It's obviously inside of you. What's inside of you?
The thing that I find not helpful. For instance,
so the not helpfulness is in you,
or the action I see. Let me make it a more realistic analogy. As a very young man, I spent a lot of time in a conservative Christian situation, and 30-some years later, I wind up interacting with these people again.
Okay.
My life's changed over the past 30 years, and I totally stirred myself up about the judgments. And so, and for
their judgments toward you?
Their judgments towards me. And then I finally realized I'm going to be concerned about that as long as I believe there's something to be judged. So apparently I'm already judging myself.
Okay.
And
because if they were judging you and you didn't think there was anything wrong with it, you would respond to them in a way perhaps similar to them making a totally erroneous statement like your hair is blue.
Exactly.
You would immediately go to questioning their perception and sanity rather than questioning whether your hair was blue.
Exactly.
But the fact that it actually caused a reaction constructively launches self-reflection, where you have to look in the mirror and wonder whether you have had the same opinion of yourself at any point.
And still hold it.
Or in any way.
Yeah, and still hold it.
Yeah, and if it is still there.
Yeah. That's what's helped me so many times in interacting with folks.
I like myself, do you?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. You don't sound very certain.
Yeah. Who are you trying to convince? Yeah. Who are you trying to convince? You or me? You know?
And I wonder how often when we say things we're trying to convince ourselves more than the other person.
Oh, yes. When people are wanting to tell you how happy they are. Repeatedly.
Say that one more time, I'm going to be sure you're not.
Yeah, exactly. Or how happy their marriage is, their relationship is, you're trying.
But rather than respond adversarially, going back to being constructive with that which is unfamiliar, to, as I suggested earlier, not because I suggested it, but because it makes sense, to, when in doubt, resort to a question. When they say it 3 times, instead of getting skeptical, to simply, sensitively, gently ask, are you trying to convince me or yourself?
Yeah, exactly.
Just a very honest question. You trying to convince me or yourself? Because you said it 3 times now, and I did hear you the first time.
Yeah.
And if that's really what's true, I have no problem believing that, but I don't know why you felt the need to say it 3 times.
In a counseling situation, it gets interesting when somebody is like, so and so this, so and so that, and so a failed relationship, so to speak. But I'm lucky that I'm over that person. And it's like, then why have we spent 15 minutes talking about this person? And they're like, oh.
As we're almost out of time, but
Oh.
The anecdote comes to mind of the two Buddhist monks who, by their vows, are not supposed to touch women and so forth.
Mm.
Walking down the road in China or wherever, and they come to a river, and there's a young woman in a beautiful gown, walking back and forth along the edge of the river, who cannot find any way to get across because she doesn't want to soil her robe
Mm-hmm.
or her dress.
Mm-hmm.
And so the one Buddhist monk picks her up and carries her across the river and sets her down, and she goes on her way, and they go on their way, the two Buddhist monks. And half an hour later, the one just can't stand the silence anymore and turns to him and says, how could you break your vows by touching that woman? And the other one responds, I carried her for 15 seconds. You've been carrying her for half an hour.
I like that. I like that a lot.
It would have made more sense to speak up right away.
Uh-huh.
At the riverbank. Don't wait half an hour.
Exactly.
Do it now.
Exactly.
Just, once the dialogue starts, we can solve almost anything in dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Silence only communicates confusion.
Right. Exactly.